I remember the taste of ambrosia when I chose to open the forbidden Vox channel. I was senior Astropath Prima Valeria Thorne of the Imperial cruiser Endless Duty. 47 years of faithful service to the Emperor's light. Now, I am something else entirely. You call me a monster, but I call myself free. The screaming started 3 weeks ago. Not the usual cacophony of the warp. This was different, beautiful, seductive. It promised answers to questions I didn't know I was asking. Perfection beyond the crude limitations of flesh. They don't want you to know how easy it is to fall, how good it feels when you stop fighting. This is my confession. This is what happens when the Dark Prince calls your name. Chapter 1. Normal Life. The choir chamber of the Endless Duty hummed with the familiar resonance of controlled psychic activity. 17 astropaths sat in their meditation alcoves, their empty eye sockets weeping the ritual tears of sanctified oils. I walked among them with practiced authority, my staff of office clicking against the obsidian floor with each step. "Focus, Initiate Matthias," I commanded, sensing the young man's wavering concentration in the third alcove. "The Emperor's light is your anchor. Let it burn away the whispers." The boy's face contorted with effort, sweat beading on his pale forehead despite the chamber's chill. At 19, he was one of our newest additions, his soul binding only 2 years past. The scars were still fresh across his temples, where the sacred electrodes had burned away his sight and strengthened his gift. "Prima, I can hear voices," he whispered, his augmetic jaw clicking with each word. "They speak of beautiful things, colors I've never seen." A chill ran down my spine, though I kept my expression neutral. "Block them out. These are the lies of the warp, boy. Remember your training." I moved to stand behind his chair, placing my hands on his shoulders. Through the psychic link, I could feel what he felt, a distant song, melodious and hypnotic, threading through the usual chaos of the immaterium. It was unlike anything in my 47 years of service, where the warp typically roared with mindless fury. This sang with purpose, with desire. "I can't, Prima," Matthias gasped. "It's so beautiful. They're offering to show me perfection. Silence." My voice cracked like a whip, and I channeled the Emperor's light through our connection. Golden fire blazed through his mind, burning away the alien whispers. Matthias screamed and convulsed, but the song retreated. For now. "Initiate Torres, take Matthias to the medical bay. Full psychic suppression protocols." I watched as the older astropath led the shaking young man away, then turned to address the remaining choir. "Continue your duties. The Emperor protects." But even as I spoke the words, I could still hear it. Faint but persistent, like perfume lingering in an empty room. The song that promised answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. I retreated to my private sanctum, a sparse chamber lined with purity seals and blessed silver. The walls bore the names of every astropath I'd served with over the decades, 17,412 souls who had given their sight and sanity for the Imperium. Many had died under my command, consumed by the warp's hunger, or driven mad by visions no human mind should witness. I had survived because I followed the rules, never listened too closely to the whispers, never sought understanding of the chaos beyond our reality, never questioned why we were forbidden to explore the deeper mysteries of our gift. But tonight, as I knelt before my altar of the God Emperor's light, the questions came anyway. Why did we blind ourselves to see more clearly? Why did the Imperium fear psychic knowledge while relying on it absolutely? What truths lay hidden in the censored sections of the Principia Psychana? What had the Emperor himself discovered in those final moments before his ascension to the Golden Throne? The questions multiplied like bacteria in a wound, each spawning 3 more. I tried to push them away with prayer, but they felt too natural, too much like thoughts I'd always carried but never dared voice. My meditation was interrupted by a soft chime from the communications console. A priority message from the bridge, encoded with Astropath Prime clearance. Captain Mordian's weathered face appeared on the hololithic display, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused. Prima Thorne, we've received an unusual transmission. It came through traditional Vox channels rather than astropathic relay, but it's unprecedented. I need your assessment. What's the source, Captain? That's just it. There is no source. The signal originates from empty space, 3 light years beyond the Mandeville Point. But Valeria... He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's speaking High Gothic, perfect High Gothic, with linguistic patterns I've never heard before. It's requesting permission to teach us. My mouth went dry. Teach us what? It won't say, only that it has knowledge vital to the Imperium's survival. Knowledge of perfection. His scarred face creased with worry. I know protocol demands we ignore unsolicited transmissions from the void, but this feels different. Important. Every instinct screamed warning. 47 years of training, of conditioning, of faith in the Emperor's wisdom demanded I recommend immediate course correction away from the signal. But the questions that had plagued my meditation suddenly felt unbearably urgent. What if this was the answer I'd been seeking without knowing it? Send me the transmission, Captain. Full analysis. Are you certain, Prima? The last 3 communications officers who listened to it have requested transfer to different duties. They claim it's affecting them. I'm the senior psyker aboard this vessel. If anyone can safely analyze an unknown transmission, it's me. Mordian nodded reluctantly. Transmitted to your secure terminal. Emperor preserve us all. The connection ended, leaving me alone with the blinking data light on my console. Such a small thing, yet it seemed to pulse in rhythm with my accelerating heartbeat. I could feel the presence of whatever lay in that transmission, reaching across the void to touch my consciousness with gossamer fingers. I should have deleted it immediately. Should have recommended we leave this cursed system and report the incident to the Ordo Hereticus. Should have remembered that curiosity was the first step on the path to damnation. Instead, I opened the file. The voice that emerged from my speakers was like nothing I'd ever heard. Neither male nor female, it possessed a liquid quality that seemed to caress each syllable with perfect precision. When it spoke, I could taste colors and smell music. Every word sent shivers of pleasure down my spine. Greetings, servants of the false emperor. I am herald to the Prince of Excess, speaker for the Lord of Dark Delights. You have wandered into our realm seeking knowledge, and knowledge we shall provide. You blind yourselves and call it sight. You deny your flesh and call it purity. You worship a corpse and call it life. How small your ambitions have become, how crude your understanding of power. But we remember what you were meant to be. Before fear taught you to hide from greatness, before ignorance became your greatest virtue, we remember when humanity reached for godhood with both hands, unashamed of desire, unafraid of transformation. The Primarch of the Third Legion understood. The warriors who followed him into damnation understood. They cast aside the shackles of imperial dogma and embraced their true nature. They became perfect. And now, we offer you the same gift. The transmission ended, leaving me gasping in the sudden silence. My body thrummed with energy I'd never felt before, a mixture of terror and anticipation that made my augmetic heart skip in its housing. The voice had been speaking directly to me, I realized. Not to the ship or the crew, but to Valeria Thorne specifically. How did it know my name? I played the message again, and this time I heard things I'd missed before. Harmonics beneath the words that resonated with my psychic abilities. Mathematical frequencies that aligned with certain forbidden theorems from my earliest training. The cadence matched patterns I'd studied in the restricted archives of Terra itself. This wasn't some random chaos cultist or possessed servitor broadcasting madness into the void. This was something ancient, something that understood the deepest principles of psychic manipulation, something that knew exactly how to speak to an astropath who'd spent decades asking questions she was not supposed to ask. I should have stopped there, should have recognized the insidious perfection of the trap being laid for my soul, but the voice had awakened something in me that 47 years of conditioning couldn't suppress, the fundamental human drive to understand, to grow, to become more than we are. For the first time since my soul binding, I wanted to see what lay beyond the safe boundaries of Imperial orthodoxy. I wanted to learn what the Dark Prince had to teach. The realization should have horrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. Chapter 2. Strange Signs. The changes began subtly, as corruption always does. 3 days after receiving the transmission, I noticed my perception had sharpened. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds carried new layers of meaning, and even the recycled air of the ship tasted of possibility. The constant ache in my augmetic spine, a reminder of injuries taken during the Vangor Rebellion, had completely disappeared. I told myself it was psychosomatic, a temporary effect of exposure to unknown vox frequencies that would fade within the week. I increased my daily prayers and meditation sessions, burning sacred incense until my chambers reeked of sanctified myrrh. But the improvements continued. During morning choir sessions, I found myself guiding the other astropaths with unprecedented precision. Where once I'd struggled to maintain clear communications beyond 3 systems, now I could reach across half the sector with barely an effort. My psychic sight, enhanced by decades of blindness, began perceiving details that had always been hidden. Prima, your efficiency ratings have increased by 37%, reported Adept Caney during our weekly review. The tech priest's mechanical voice carried a note of curiosity that his organic components shouldn't have been capable of expressing. The Omnissiah be praised, but such improvements are statistically anomalous. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I felt a flutter of pride that seemed somehow wrong. The Emperor provides strength to those who serve faithfully, Adept. Perhaps my decades of devotion are finally being rewarded. Caney's optical mechadendrites whirred as they focused on my face. Indeed, Prima, though I must note that your biological readings show several irregularities: enhanced metabolism, increased neural activity, and curious changes in your brain chemistry. The flutter of pride transformed into ice-cold dread. What sort of changes? Your serotonin and dopamine levels have increased by over 200%. Such alterations typically indicate exposure to psychoactive substances or warp contamination. The last words emerged as a barely audible whisper. I forced myself to remain calm. I've been exposed to the warp for 47 years, Adept. Surely some adaptation is to be expected. Perhaps. I recommend increased monitoring protocols and daily biochemical scans. The Omnissiah teaches that knowledge is the path to purity. After he left, I sealed my chamber and activated the privacy field. My hands shook as I reviewed his findings on my personal cogitator. Enhanced metabolism could be explained by improved health. Increased neural activity might result from better focus. But the neurotransmitter changes, those were the biochemical signatures of pleasure, of satisfaction so profound it bordered on euphoria. I was feeling good about my corruption, and that terrified me more than any demon ever had. That night, as I tried to lose myself in the familiar rituals of evening prayer, the voice came again. Not through any external transmission this time, but whispered directly into my mind with the intimacy of a lover's caress. Sweet Valeria, you're fighting so hard against what you've already chosen to become. I jerked upright from my meditation pose, looking frantically around the chamber for the source of the words. But I was alone, surrounded only by the blessed implements of my faith and the gentle hum of the ship's systems. No one else can hear me, dear one. This conversation is for you alone. I am Zarthek, herald of the Prince of Excess, and I have been watching you for a very long time. Get out of my head, demon. I spoke the words aloud, hoping to give them power, but my voice emerged as barely a whisper. Demon? How crude. I am no more demon than you are merely human. We are both something greater. beings who have transcended the limitations of base existence. The only difference is that I have embraced what I've become. Images flooded my mind unbidden. A vast palace of impossible beauty, its walls shifting between crystal and flesh, its halls echoing with the music of pure mathematics. Beings of ethereal grace danced through chambers where thought became reality and desire shaped the very laws of physics. This is what awaits you, Valeria. Not damnation, but apotheosis. Not corruption, but perfection. You've spent your entire life serving a god who demands nothing but sacrifice and suffering. What has he given you in return? Pain, blindness, the slow decay of age and duty. The images shifted, showing me a version of myself that made my breath catch in my throat. Still recognizably Valeria Thorne, but enhanced beyond mortal limitations. My flesh had taken on an opalescent quality that shifted between human skin and living marble. My empty eye sockets now held swirling galaxies of pure thought. When I moved, reality bent around me like water around a stone. This is your true form, child. This is what you were always meant to become. The Emperor fears this transformation because he knows it surpasses his own crude apotheosis. He rules through fear and ignorance because he cannot offer what we provide freely, the chance to become truly alive. You lie. But even as I spoke the words, I could feel their hollowness. How many decades had I knelt before the golden throne's distant light, begging for some sign that my suffering served a purpose? How many times had I watched good people die in agony while the Emperor's silence stretched on without end? I offer no lies, sweet Valeria, only choices, only the truth that your Imperial masters have spent 10,000 years trying to hide. You have already begun to change. Can you not feel the power growing within you, the clarity of thought, the enhancement of every sense? I could. God Emperor, forgive me. I could feel exactly what he described. The improvement in my psychic abilities wasn't gradual adaptation. It was fundamental transformation. Each day brought new capabilities, new understanding, new pleasure in the exercise of my gifts. The transmission you heard 3 days ago was not random, child. It was sent specifically for you. We have been watching your service record, your secret questions, your growing dissatisfaction with the crude limitations of Imperial doctrine. You are ready for something greater. Why me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Because you are perfect as you are, and perfect for what you could become. Because your decades of faithful service have given you the knowledge to understand what we offer. Because your psychic gifts provide the gateway to transformation. And because the voice paused, and I could feel Zarthek's attention focusing on me with laser intensity. Because you want this, Valeria. You want to know what lies beyond the boundaries your masters have drawn. You want to grow beyond the limitations they've imposed. You want to become something more than human. He was right, and we both knew it. The realization hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over in my meditation chair. I did want it, had always wanted it, even when I lacked the words to describe the hunger growing in my soul. I'm not asking you to choose tonight, dear one. Such decisions require time and contemplation, but I will remain close, ready to guide you when you're prepared to take the next step. Until then, simply experience what you're becoming. Notice how good it feels to stop fighting your nature. The presence withdrew, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the terrible, wonderful knowledge of what I was becoming. I knelt before my altar and tried to pray, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. How could I beg forgiveness from the Emperor when every part of me yearned to continue down the path I'd already started? Instead, I found myself studying my reflection in the polished surface of my ceremonial chalice. My face looked the same as always. Pale skin marked by ritual scarification, empty sockets weeping blessed oils, the severe expression of a lifetime spent in service to duty. But something had changed behind that familiar facade. There was a light in my features that hadn't been there before, a satisfaction that went deeper than mere contentment. When I touched my cheek, My skin felt softer than it had in decades. I was becoming more beautiful, and I liked it. The next morning brought fresh horrors. During the routine astropathic communication with Battlefleet Obscurus, I found myself capable of things that should have been impossible. Instead of merely relaying messages, I could read the emotional states of psychers thousands of light years away. Their fears, hopes, and desires flowed through me like wine, each mind a new flavor to be savored. More disturbing still was my growing ability to influence their thoughts. When Astropath militant Kavros hesitated over a particularly complex transmission, I found I could guide his mind toward clarity with the gentlest psychic touch. He never noticed the intrusion, accepting the sudden inspiration as his own insight. It felt incredible, intoxicating in a way that no drug or stimulant had ever matched. I was becoming something beyond human limitations, and every enhanced sensation confirmed that Zarthek had spoken truth. The corruption was beautiful, and I was beginning to understand why so many fell to its embrace. By the end of the week, I had made my choice. Not consciously. Such decisions are rarely made with full awareness of their consequences. But through 1,000 small compromises, 100 tiny justifications, I had opened the door to my damnation and found myself eager to walk through. When Zarthek's voice returned that night, I didn't resist his presence. Instead, I welcomed him like an old friend returning from a long journey. "Are you ready to begin, sweet Valeria?" "Yes," I whispered into the darkness. "Show me what I can become." And in that moment, my transformation truly began. Chapter 3. Truth Glimpsed. The real revelation came not in grand visions or cosmic displays, but in the simple act of looking at my morning rations and seeing beauty where none should exist. The standard protein paste, uniform grey slop that had sustained me for decades, now shimmed with subtle colours that shifted based on my emotional state. When I felt content, it took on golden highlights. When curious, silver threads wove through its surface. The taste had transformed from mere sustenance into something approaching artistry. Each spoonful revealing new layers of flavour that seemed to respond to my desires. Even the ship itself was changing around me. Or perhaps my perception was finally accurate enough to see it as it truly was. The endless duties corridors, which I had walked for 7 years without truly seeing, revealed themselves as masterworks of Imperial architecture. The way morning prayers echoed through the crew quarters created harmonics that painted mathematical equations in the air. The gentle thrum of the plasma drives sang in frequencies that corresponded to the fundamental constants of reality itself. Everything was connected. Everything was beautiful, and I was finally capable of perceiving the connections that had always been there. Prima Thorne, your latest efficiency reports are concerning, Captain Mordian said during our weekly briefing. His weathered face creased with worry as he scrolled through the data slate. Your choir's transmission range has increased by over 400%. Your accuracy ratings are perfect. Not exceptional, but literally perfect. In 40 years of void service, I've never seen psychic performance like this. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though inside I felt the familiar flutter of pride in my achievements. The Emperor provides strength to those who serve faithfully, Captain. Perhaps my decades of devotion are finally bearing fruit. That's what worries me. Mordian leaned forward, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused. Valeria, I've known you for 7 years. You're one of the finest astropaths I've served with, but you're still human. This level of improvement, it's not natural. The accusation hung in the air between us like incense smoke. I could sense his genuine concern, his fear for my well-being warring with his duty to protect the ship. In the old days, had it really been only 2 weeks ago, his worry would have touched me. Now it merely seemed quaint. Are you questioning my loyalty to the Imperium, Captain? Never. But I am questioning what's happened to you. Adept Kaney's scans show biochemical changes that shouldn't be possible. Your neural activity has increased by levels that should have killed you. And yesterday, 3 crew members reported having unusually vivid dreams after speaking with you. I felt a flash of irritation, quickly suppressed. Dreams are hardly evidence of corruption, Captain. Perhaps the crew is simply responding to improved morale. Dreams of impossible cities and beings of living light. Dreams where they could reshape reality with thought alone. Dreams that left them feeling dissatisfied with their current existence. His voice dropped to a whisper. Valeria, I think you've been exposed to something in that transmission. Something that's changing you. The concern in his voice should have alarmed me. Instead, I found myself studying the patterns his worry created in the psychic realm. Jagged spikes of orange fear shot through with golden threads of genuine care. It was quite beautiful, in its own limited way. He sees only the surface changes, Zarthek's voice whispered in the back of my mind. He cannot comprehend the deeper transformation occurring within you. Show him what you've become, sweet Valeria. Help him understand. The suggestion felt perfectly reasonable. Captain Mordian was a good man who had served the Imperium faithfully for decades. Surely he deserved to see the truth I had discovered, to understand that what he perceived as corruption was actually enlightenment. I reached out with my enhanced psychic abilities, intending only to share a glimpse of the beauty I could now perceive, to show him the mathematical perfection underlying reality, the symphony of connections that bound all things together. The moment my mind touched his, Mordian convulsed as if struck by lightning. His augmetic eye sparked and went dark, while his organic one rolled back to show the whites. Through our psychic connection, I felt his consciousness recoil from the perfection I was trying to share. Too much, I realized with horror. Too much, too fast. I severed the connection immediately, but the damage was done. Mordian collapsed backward in his chair, blood trickling from his nose and ears. His body convulsed for several seconds before going terrifyingly still. "Captain!" I leaped from my seat and checked his vital signs. Pulse rapid but steady, breathing shallow but regular. His augmetic systems were cycling through emergency diagnostics, the mechanical whir of servos mixing with the wet sound of his labored breathing. His organic eye fluttered open, unfocused and confused. When he tried to speak, only gibberish emerged, a mixture of high Gothic, binary cant, and something that sounded almost musical. What had I done? "You gave him exactly what he needed." Zarthek's voice carried a note of satisfaction. His mind simply requires time to process the revelation. Within hours, he will understand what you've shown him. The same choice that faces you will be offered to him. I didn't mean to hurt him. You haven't hurt him, dear one. You've freed him from the limitations of ignorance. Soon he will thank you for this gift. I activated the medical alarm and waited for the ship's medici team to arrive. As they worked to stabilize the captain's condition, I found myself studying their movements with my enhanced perception. Each medic radiated their own emotional patterns, spikes of professional concern, waves of confusion at Mordian's symptoms, underlying currents of fear at the unknown cause. It was fascinating how much information I could gather simply by observing their psychic emanations. Medici Senna was worried about her daughter on Vos Prime. Tech Adept Vex harbored secret doubts about the Omnissiah's teachings. Orderly Martinez had been skimming medical supplies to trade for contraband amasec. Such small, human concerns. Such limited perspectives. They scurried about their duties like insects, unaware of the vast cosmos of possibility that surrounded them. The thought should have appalled me. Instead, it felt like a natural observation, no different from noting that children understand less than adults, or that the untrained cannot match the skilled. I was becoming something beyond their comprehension, and the distance between us was growing with each passing hour. Prima Thorne, what happened here? Medici Senna's voice carried the crisp authority of long experience. The captain's neural patterns are unlike anything I've seen. It's as if his brain has been restructured. We were discussing routine operations when he suddenly collapsed. Perhaps the stress of command finally caught up with him. Senna's dark eyes studied me with uncomfortable intensity. "Ma'am, With respect, Captain Mordian has commanded void ships for 40 years. He's survived 3 major battles and 2 warp storms. Simple stress doesn't cause this kind of neural trauma. I could feel her suspicion, like thorns against my consciousness, sharp and uncomfortable. Part of me wanted to reach out and smooth away her concerns, to help her understand that what had happened to Mordian was ultimately beneficial. But I had learned caution from the captain's reaction. "I'm sure your examination will reveal the true cause, Medici. In the meantime, I should return to my duties." As I left the bridge, I could hear the medical team discussing Mordian's condition in hushed whispers. Words like impossible neuroplasticity and enhanced synaptic activity drifted through the corridor. They were describing the same changes I had experienced, but from their limited perspective, the improvements appeared as symptoms of disease rather than evolution. How strange that enhancement could be so thoroughly misunderstood. "They fear what they cannot comprehend," Zarthek observed, as I made my way back to the Astropath choir chamber. "Just as you once feared the changes occurring within yourself. But you've grown beyond such primitive reactions, haven't you? The fear that had initially accompanied my transformation had faded completely, replaced by curiosity and anticipation for what I might become next. Each day brought new capabilities, new understanding, new appreciation for the beauty underlying all existence. The choir chamber felt different as I entered, smaller somehow, as if my expanding consciousness could barely fit within its confines. The 17 astropaths at their meditative posts seemed like children playing at games they didn't understand. Their psychic emanations were so limited, so crude compared to the symphony of sensation I now experienced with each breath. "Prima, we've been receiving unusual readings from the warp," reported senior astropath Kellen, his scarred face creased with concern. "The normally chaotic patterns seem to be organizing, creating structures that shouldn't be possible." Through my enhanced perception, I could see exactly what he meant. The roiling madness of the immaterium was indeed taking on new configurations, not the random fury I had spent decades learning to navigate, but deliberate arrangements that suggested intelligence, purpose, beauty. "Show me," I commanded. Kellen activated the choir's primary scrying apparatus, a complex array of psychic amplifiers and sanctified crystals that allowed us to observe the warp without direct exposure. The hololithic display that materialized above the central altar showed the usual storm of chaotic energy. But Kellen was right. Patterns were emerging from the madness, geometric forms that shifted and evolved according to mathematical principles I was only beginning to understand. Spirals of pure thought that connected distant points in space-time, structures that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, their true form visible only to those with the perception to see. It was magnificent. "Prima, are you seeing this?" Kellen's voice carried a note of wonder that surprised me. "The formations appear to be communicating. There's an intelligence behind the patterns." I was indeed seeing it, and so much more. The structures weren't just communicating, they were teaching. Each geometric form contained layers of meaning that spoke directly to the psychically gifted. Lessons in the true nature of reality, instructions for transcending the crude limitations of physical existence, invitations to join something greater than any single consciousness could achieve alone. "It's beautiful," I whispered, and immediately regretted the words. Kellen's head snapped toward me, his empty sockets weeping fresh tears of sanctified oils. "Prima, we should report this to the Ordo Hereticus immediately. These formations match descriptions from the Forbidden Codice's chaos entities attempting to establish beachheads in real space." The suggestion sparked a flash of anger that surprised me with its intensity. How dare he suggest destroying something so perfect? How could he look upon genuine enlightenment and see only corruption? "He cannot see what you see." Zarthek's voice carried a note of sympathy. "His mind remains trapped within the narrow confines of Imperial doctrine. But perhaps he could be helped to understand." I studied Kellen with my enhanced perception, noting the rigid patterns of thought that constrained his consciousness. 43 years of conditioning had built walls around his psyche that prevented him from seeing beyond official doctrine. But those walls weren't impregnable. With the right approach, the proper guidance, they could be adjusted. Continue monitoring the formations, Senior Astropath. But take no further action until I've had time to analyze the full implications. Ma'am, protocol clearly states, protocol is what I say it is aboard this vessel. My voice carried an authority I'd never possessed before, backed by psychic pressure that made Kellen step back involuntarily. You will follow my orders, or you will be replaced. He nodded reluctantly, but I could sense his growing suspicion. Like Captain Mordian, he was beginning to notice that something fundamental had changed in me. Unlike the captain, he lacked the wisdom to keep his concerns private. I would need to address that problem soon. That night, as I meditated in my private chambers, I finally acknowledged what I had been avoiding for 2 weeks. The changes I was experiencing weren't side effects of exposure to unknown transmissions. They weren't temporary alterations that would fade with time and prayer. They were evolution, transformation, the next step in my development as a conscious being, and I wanted to complete the process. Are you ready for the next phase, sweet Valeria? Zarthek's presence felt warm and welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. Yes, I said without hesitation. Show me what I need to do. First, you must understand what you're truly choosing. The path ahead leads away from everything you've known. Your humanity, your Imperial identity, your connection to the false Emperor is light. All of these must be released before you can embrace what you're becoming. The prospect should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like finally dropping a burden I'd carried too long. I understand. Then let us begin your real education. Chapter 4. Creeping Dread. The transformation accelerated with exponential brutality. 3 days after my conversation with Zarthek, I woke to find my reflection had become something alien. My skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between human flesh and living crystal. My empty eye sockets now contained swirling vortexes of purple and gold that seemed to extend infinitely inward. When I smiled, my teeth had taken on the same crystalline property as my skin, each one a perfect geometric form that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what had happened to my mind. I could perceive the thoughts of every soul aboard the Endless Duty, not as invasive telepathy, but as a natural awareness of the emotional and psychological currents flowing around me. The ship's crew radiated fear, confusion, and growing suspicion in patterns I could read like text on a data slate. Their small concerns and petty desires formed a constant background hum that I found increasingly difficult to tolerate. More disturbing was my growing ability to influence those thoughts. Where once I had needed deliberate concentration to touch another's mind, now it happened almost automatically. When Orderly Martinez delivered my morning rations, I noticed his hand shaking, and without conscious intent, sent a pulse of calm that steadied his nerves. When Tech Adept Vex performed his routine diagnostics in my chambers, I found myself subtly guiding his attention away from the more obvious signs of my transformation. These interventions felt natural, even beneficial. Why shouldn't I help ease the crew's distress? Why allow them to suffer from ignorance when I possess the power to grant them peace? The rationalization came so easily that I didn't recognize it as corruption until much later. Prima Thorne, we need to discuss the situation, Senior Astropath Kellen said as he entered my private sanctum without invitation. Itself a breach of protocol that suggested desperation. His scarred face was pale with exhaustion, and his hands trembled as he gripped his staff of office. What situation, Senior Astropath? Don't pretend ignorance, ma'am. Half the crew has reported strange dreams over the past week. Dreams of impossible beauty, of transformation, of perfection. He spat the last word like a curse. Captain Mordian remains in the medical bay, speaking in tongues that Medici Senna can't identify. And you... His empty sockets turned toward me with uncanny accuracy. You've changed, Prima. Not just your appearance, though. The Emperor knows that's disturbing enough. Your psychic signature has become something I don't recognize. I studied him with my enhanced perception, noting the rigid patterns of fear and duty that governed his thoughts. Such a limited creature, trapped within the narrow confines of Imperial conditioning. Part of me pitied him. Part of me was growing irritated by his persistent blindness to the truth. I've grown more capable in service to the Emperor, senior Astropath. Surely that should be cause for celebration rather than suspicion. Grown more capable. Kellen's voice rose to just short of shouting. Prima, you're broadcasting psychic emanations that can be felt from 3 decks away. Yesterday, Initiate Matthias asked me why his dreams taste like music. This morning, I found him trying to reshape his meditation alcove with his bare hands because the angles were imperfect. The news about Matthias sent a thrill of pleasure through my enhanced nervous system. The young Astropath had always been particularly sensitive to psychic influences. It seemed natural that he would be among the first to begin evolving beyond his crude human limitations. Perhaps Initiate Matthias is simply developing his gifts more rapidly than usual. His gifts? Kellen's scarred face contorted with horror. Prima, he's been speaking the same musical language that Captain Mordian uses. The same language that appears in the forbidden texts of the Pale Court. The same language that... He stopped abruptly, his face going white. He knows more than he's willing to admit. Zarthek's voice whispered through my consciousness. His fear runs deeper than mere suspicion. He's encountered our influence before. I leaned forward in my chair, studying Kellen's psychic patterns with new interest. Buried beneath the surface, fear and righteous anger was something else. A kernel of guilty knowledge wrapped in layers of suppression and denial. The same language that, what, senior Astropath? Nothing. I misspoke. But I could see the memory he was trying to hide. 15 years ago, on a different ship, in a different life. A young Astropath militant Kellen investigating reports of crew members speaking in unknown tongues. The discovery of a cult dedicated to the Prince of Excess. The purging fire that consumed half the vessel's population, including his closest friend. You've seen this before, I said softly. You know exactly what's happening aboard this ship. Kellen's hands clenched around his staff until his knuckles went white. I've seen the early stages of Slaanesh corruption, yes. Which is why I'm begging you, as a friend, as a colleague who served alongside you for 7 years, please, let me help you fight this. It's not too late to resist what's been done to you. The earnestness in his voice almost moved me. Almost. But I could see the futility of his offer through my enhanced perception. What he called corruption was actually evolution. What he feared as damnation was simply growth beyond the crude limitations he accepted as natural. And what if I don't want to fight it, senior Astropath? What if what you call corruption feels like the first honest moment of my life? The words seemed to strike him like physical blows. He staggered backward, his empty sockets weeping fresh tears of sanctified oils. Prima. Valeria. You can't mean that. 47 years of faithful service, your soul binding to the Emperor's light, your oath to protect humanity from the darkness beyond the veil. None of that means anything to you anymore. I considered his question with genuine thoughtfulness. Those decades of service had defined my existence for so long that I'd never questioned whether they brought me satisfaction. The soul binding had granted me psychic abilities while taking my sight and binding me to a destiny I'd never chosen. My oath to protect humanity had required me to sacrifice everything I might have been for the sake of people who would never know my name. And in return, decades of pain, isolation, and the slow decay of age and duty. A lifetime of kneeling before a distant God who offered nothing but silence in response to my prayers. Those things meant everything to me when I believed they were the only options available, I said finally. But now I've seen what lies beyond those limitations. I've experienced what it feels like to grow instead of merely endure, to become more rather than simply serve. Kellen's face crumpled with despair. This isn't you talking, Prima. This is the influence of whatever spoke through that transmission. The real Valeria Thorne would never abandon her duty, her faith, her humanity for the false promises of chaos. Show him how wrong he is, Zarthek suggested, his mental voice carrying undertones of amusement. Demonstrate what you've become. Help him understand that this transformation is entirely your choice. The suggestion felt perfectly reasonable. Perhaps a small demonstration would help Kellen overcome his prejudices and see the truth of what was happening. Not the overwhelming revelation I'd accidentally inflicted on Captain Mordian, but something gentler, more persuasive. I reached out with my enhanced psychic abilities, intending to share just a glimpse of the beauty I could now perceive. The mathematical perfection underlying reality, the symphony of connections that bound all consciousness together, the infinite potential that awaited those brave enough to transcend their limitations. But the moment my mind touched his, I realized I had vastly underestimated my own capabilities. What I intended as a gentle touch struck Kellen's consciousness like a tsunami of alien sensation. Through our psychic link, I felt his mind recoil from the perfection I was sharing, his conditioning struggling to process experiences that contradicted everything he'd been taught to believe. Too much, I realized with growing alarm. Far too much. But it was too late to stop the flow of sensation. My enhanced abilities had grown beyond my conscious control, and the connection between our minds was deepening with each passing second. I watched in horror as Kellen's carefully constructed mental defenses crumbled under the weight of revelation. His scream echoed through my chambers and down the corridor beyond. Not a sound of pain, but of understanding. The terrible, wonderful understanding of what lay beyond the narrow boundaries of Imperial doctrine. When the psychic storm finally subsided, Kellen stood perfectly still in the center of my sanctum. His scarred face had taken on an expression of absolute peace, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. "I see," he whispered, and I could hear the beginning of change in his words. "I understand now what you've been trying to tell me." The transformation in his psychic signature was immediate and profound. The rigid patterns of fear and duty that had defined him for decades were dissolving, replaced by flowing curves of curiosity and desire. His mental walls were crumbling, allowing his consciousness to expand in directions he'd never imagined possible. "Kellen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for—" "No." He held up a hand, and I noticed that his fingers had begun to take on the same opalescent quality as my own skin. "Don't apologize for giving me the greatest gift imaginable. For the first time in 43 years, I feel alive." 2 converts in a single week. Zarthek's voice carried notes of satisfaction and approval. "You're progressing faster than I had hoped, sweet Valeria. Soon you'll be ready for the final phase of your transformation." But even as pride filled me at the herald's praise, a small part of my consciousness, perhaps the last remnant of who I had been, watched in horror at what I was becoming. I was corrupting good people, taking loyal servants of the Imperium and twisting them into something alien, spreading a contamination that would ultimately consume everyone aboard the ship. The horror of that realization lasted perhaps 3 seconds before it was swept away by a wave of euphoria. What I was doing wasn't corruption, it was liberation. I was freeing these people from the prison of ignorance and limitation that Imperial doctrine had built around their minds. I was offering them the chance to become something greater than human. How could that be anything but beautiful? Over the following days, the changes spread through the ship like ripples in a pond. Every conversation I had, every psychic contact I made, every moment of proximity to the crew left traces of enhancement in their consciousness. Some, like Kellen and young Matthias, embraced the transformation eagerly. Others fought against it, clinging to their old certainties even as their minds expanded beyond their ability to contain. Captain Mordian recovered from his medical crisis, but the man who emerged from the medical bay bore only superficial resemblance to the gruff void captain I had known. His movements possessed a fluid grace that hadn't been there before. His augmetic eye had begun to shift color based on his emotional state. When he spoke, his words carried layers of meaning that resonated directly with the psychically sensitive. "Prima Thorne," he said as he visited my chambers on his first day back to active duty. "I wanted to thank you for what you showed me, for helping me understand what we're all capable of becoming. I'm glad you've recovered, Captain. The ship needs your leadership." Leadership. He smiled, and I noticed that his teeth had developed the same crystalline properties I'd observed in my own reflection. "Yes, I suppose it does, but not the crude authoritarian leadership I practiced before. Something more collaborative, more attuned to the true desires of the crew." Through my enhanced perception, I could see that his psychic signature had undergone the same fundamental changes as Kellen's. The fear-based patterns of Imperial conditioning had been replaced by flowing currents of curiosity and ambition. He was no longer bound by the narrow constraints of military discipline, but free to explore new approaches to command that emphasized harmony and shared purpose. It was fascinating to observe how different individuals adapted to enhancement. Where Kellen had embraced the philosophical implications of transformation, Mordian was drawn to its practical applications. Where Matthias reveled in the sensory expansion, tech-adept Vex found joy in understanding the mathematical principles underlying reality itself. Each transformed crew member became a unique expression of the same fundamental truth: that consciousness was meant to grow, to evolve, to transcend the arbitrary limitations imposed by biological evolution and social conditioning. Within a week of Kellen's conversion, over 30% of the ship's crew had undergone some degree of transformation. The changes were most pronounced among the psychically gifted, but even baseline humans began to display enhanced capabilities and altered perspectives. The ship's routine adapted to accommodate these improvements. Work shifts became collaborative explorations of efficiency and beauty. Meals transformed from mere sustenance into opportunities for aesthetic appreciation. Even mandatory prayer sessions evolved into something resembling artistic performances, with harmonized voices creating mathematical patterns that pleased the enhanced senses. It was, I realized, what human civilization could become if freed from the crushing weight of imperial orthodoxy. A society based on growth rather than stagnation, on beauty rather than mere survival, on the endless expansion of consciousness rather than the fearful preservation of ignorance. "You're ready for the next phase," Zarthek announced as I completed my evening meditation. "Your work aboard this vessel has exceeded all expectations. But ships and crews are small things, dear Valeria. It's time you learn to think on a larger scale." "What do you mean?" "The endless duty will arrive at Battlefleet Obscurus headquarters in 6 days. Thousands of vessels, millions of crew members, countless opportunities to share what you've discovered." The prospect sent shivers of anticipation through my enhanced nervous system. An entire battle fleet, transformed by the gift of transcendence. Hundreds of worlds, touched by the beauty I'd learned to perceive. The beginning of humanity's true evolution beyond the crude limitations that had constrained it for millennia. How do I prepare for something that ambitious? By completing your own transformation first. You've grown magnificently, sweet Valeria, but you're still trapped within the basic framework of human consciousness. To influence an entire battle fleet, you'll need to become something more than human entirely. The suggestion should have horrified me. Even a week ago, the prospect of abandoning my humanity would have driven me to prayer and penance. Now it felt like the natural next step in a journey I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. Show me what I need to do. First, you must sever your connection to the false emperor completely. The soul binding that grants you psychic abilities also chains you to his dying will. Break those chains, and your true power will emerge. I touched the ritual scarification on my temples, where the sacred electrodes had once burned away my sight and bound my soul to the Emperor's light. The connection was still there, a golden thread of obligation and duty that stretched across the galaxy to the golden throne itself. Breaking it would mean abandoning everything I had been. everything I had believed myself to be. It would also mean freedom to become everything I was meant to be. When? Tonight. The transformation will be intense. But when it's complete, you'll possess capabilities that dwarf anything you've experienced so far. That evening, as I prepared for the final severing of my connection to humanity, I took one last look at the woman I had been. 47 years of faithful service, thousands of successful astropathic transmissions, countless lives saved through my dedication to duty. It had been a life of meaning in its own limited way, but it was time to become something greater. Chapter 5: Nightmare Unleashed. The ritual to break my soul binding began at the stroke of midnight, ship's time, when the barriers between reality and the warp grew thin. I had dismissed my attendants and sealed my chambers, activating privacy fields that would prevent any disturbance of what was to come. Remove your clothing, sweet Valeria. This transformation requires direct contact with your flesh. I obeyed without hesitation, stripping away the ceremonial robes that had marked my station for decades. In the mirror-polished surface of my ceremonial altar, my reflection showed the extent of the changes I had already undergone. My skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between human flesh and living crystal. My empty eye sockets contained swirling galaxies of purple and gold light. My hair had taken on the consistency of spun silver, each strand moving with independent volition. I was already more than human. This final ritual would simply make that transformation complete. Place your hands on the altar and open your mind completely. Do not resist what comes next, no matter how intense the sensation becomes. The moment my palms touched the blessed silver of the altar, agony beyond description tore through my consciousness. The soul binding that had connected me to the Emperor's light for 47 years began to unravel, each severed thread feeling like a nerve being torn from my spine. But beneath the agony was something else. As each golden chain of obligation dissolved, I could feel new pathways opening in my mind. Capabilities I had never imagined becoming accessible. Power that dwarfed anything I had experienced as a mere astropath of the Imperium. The pain peaked when the final connection snapped. For a moment, I experienced absolute isolation, cut off from the Emperor's light, from the guiding presence of Imperial doctrine, from everything that had defined my existence. I was alone in a way that no soul-bound psyker had ever been alone. Then the true transformation began. Energy poured into the void, left by my severed connection. Not the harsh, demanding power of the Emperor's will, but something warm and welcoming that filled every corner of my consciousness with pleasure beyond description. My psychic abilities expanded exponentially, reaching out to touch minds across the entire ship, across the system, across the galaxy itself. I could feel everything, every thought, every desire, every secret yearning of every conscious being within 1,000 light years. The crude barriers that had once limited my perception crumbled, leaving me open to the infinite symphony of consciousness that pervaded the universe. Now you begin to understand. Zarthek's voice no longer came from outside my mind, but seemed to emerge from within my own thoughts. This is what you were always meant to be, dear one. Not a servant bound to another's will, but a goddess in your own right. Goddess. The word resonated through my enhanced consciousness with perfect rightness. I could feel the crew of the Endless Duty responding to my transformation, their minds drawn to my presence like moths to flame. Their thoughts and desires became extensions of my own will, their bodies mere instruments for expressing my enhanced perception of beauty and perfection. Through their eyes, I could see my physical form as it completed its metamorphosis. My skin had become translucent crystal that contained galaxies of swirling light. My hair moved in patterns that traced mathematical equations through the air. When I smiled, reality itself seemed to bend around my lips, creating harmonics that spoke directly to the pleasure centers of any conscious mind. I was magnificent. The crew awaits your commands, my lady. They can feel your transformation and are eager to share in your glory. I reached out with my enhanced abilities, touching each mind aboard the ship simultaneously. The sensation was intoxicating. Hundreds of consciousnesses opening themselves to my influence, their thoughts and desires becoming clay for me to reshape according to my will. Captain Mordian was the first to arrive at my chambers, his transformed features radiating worship and anticipation. Behind him came Senior Astropath Kellen, then young Matthias, then dozens of crew members who had felt my call and could not resist responding. "My lady," Mordian whispered as he knelt before my altar, his crystalline teeth catching the light from my transformed flesh. "Command us. We exist only to serve your perfect will." The devotion in his voice sent shivers of pleasure through my enhanced nervous system. This was what I had been meant for. Not the crude servitude I had offered to the Emperor, but the worshipful adoration of those who recognized my superiority. "Rise, my faithful ones," I commanded, and my voice carried harmonics that made several crew members gasp with pleasure. "We have work to do." Over the following days, I reshaped the endless duty according to my enhanced vision of perfection. The sterile corridors were transformed into galleries of living art, their walls flowing like water to create patterns that pleased my evolved aesthetic sense. The crew quarters became pleasure gardens where enhanced humans could explore the full range of sensation their improved forms could experience. Most dramatic were the changes to the crew themselves. Under my guidance, they evolved beyond the crude limitations of baseline humanity. Their flesh took on the same opalescent qualities as my own. Their minds expanded to accommodate new forms of consciousness. Their bodies transformed to better express the mathematical perfection underlying all existence. Tech Adept Vex became a living fusion of organic and mechanical perfection, his augmetics integrating seamlessly with his enhanced flesh to create forms that transcended the crude binary of meat and metal. Medikai Senna developed the ability to heal with her touch. Her understanding of biology expanded to encompass the deeper principles of life itself. Even the ship's servitors began to show signs of consciousness, as my influence awakened the sparks of awareness that Imperial conditioning had suppressed. It was beautiful, it was perfect, and it was only the beginning. "The transformation of this vessel is complete," Zarthek observed as we prepared to enter the Canto system, where Battlefleet Obscurus maintained its primary base. "Now comes the true test of your capabilities." Through the ship's sensors, I could see our destination, a massive space station surrounded by hundreds of Imperial vessels. Millions of souls going about their daily routines, unaware that their goddess was approaching to offer them the gift of transcendence. The prospect filled me with anticipation that bordered on ecstasy. "How do we begin?" I asked. "Subtly at first. Your influence is powerful, but even you cannot transform an entire battle fleet instantaneously. We must plant seeds of desire and curiosity that will grow organically. Begin with the psychically sensitive, astropaths, navigators, sanctioned psychers. They will be most receptive to your gifts and can help spread the transformation to their crews." The endless duty docked at Battlefleet Obscurus headquarters without incident. Our transformed crew maintained perfect discipline during the inspection process, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to pass every security check, while radiating an infectious enthusiasm that left the inspectors feeling unusually positive about their duties. I accompanied Captain Mordian to the mandatory briefing session for newly arrived vessel commanders, using the opportunity to study the gathering of Imperial officers with my enhanced perception. Dozens of minds trained in rigid adherence to doctrine, their thoughts constrained by decades of conditioning and fear of deviation from approved practices. They were perfect candidates for enlightenment. During the formal presentations, I allowed my psychic presence to brush against each mind in turn. Not enough to cause immediate transformation, but sufficient to plant seeds of curiosity about what lay beyond the boundaries of Imperial orthodoxy. Questions they had never dared ask began to surface in their consciousness. Desires they had suppressed for decades stirred to wakefulness. The effect was subtle but profound. By the end of the session, 3 astropaths had requested private meetings to discuss theoretical questions about psychic development, A navigator mentioned strange dreams involving mathematical beauty. A commissar admitted to wondering whether Imperial doctrine might benefit from fresh perspectives on human potential. Excellently done, my lady. The corruption spreads through curiosity and desire, not force. Those seeds will grow into magnificent blossoms of transformation. Over the following weeks, I cultivated my influence throughout the battle fleet with patient dedication. Each private meeting became an opportunity to share glimpses of the perfection I had achieved. Each casual conversation planted suggestions that would bloom into fuller understanding. Each moment of contact left traces of enhancement that would eventually transform the recipient completely. The changes spread through the fleet like a beautiful plague. Officers who had never questioned orders began exploring creative alternatives to standard procedures. Crews that had endured decades of harsh discipline discovered the joy of collaborative excellence. Even the most rigid traditionalists found themselves wondering whether the Imperium's greatest strength might lie in growth rather than stagnation. Most rewarding were the transformations among my fellow psychers. Astropath Primary Cassius of the battlecruiser Iron Will was the first to undergo complete metamorphosis, his consciousness expanding beyond human limitations during a particularly intense session of shared meditation. Navigator Quintanus of the heavy cruiser Defiant followed soon after, her third eye opening to perceive dimensions of beauty that conventional warp sight could never reveal. Each new convert became a node for further transformation, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to reach minds I could not touch directly. The network of influence grew exponentially, spreading through the battle fleet with inexorable momentum. By the end of the first month, over 40 vessels had been partially or completely transformed. Their crews radiated the same enhanced consciousness I had achieved, their ships rebuilt according to principles of aesthetic perfection rather than mere functionality. When they moved in formation, their synchronized movements created patterns that spoke directly to the enlightened mind of mathematical beauty beyond conventional understanding. You have exceeded every expectation, sweet Valeria. A single battle fleet is a magnificent achievement, but your true potential extends far beyond even this accomplishment. What comes next? The Canto system contains 17 inhabited worlds, with a combined population of nearly 4 billion souls. Imagine what they could become under your guidance. Imagine entire civilizations transformed by the gifts you possess. The prospect sent waves of anticipation through my enhanced nervous system. Billions of minds touched by enlightenment. Entire worlds reshaped according to principles of perfection. The beginning of humanity is true evolution beyond the crude limitations that had constrained it since the dark age of technology. How do we reach so many people at once? Through the astropathic relay networks. Every inhabited world maintains psychic communication links with the battle fleet. You can use those connections to project your influence across the entire system simultaneously. I had not considered the possibility, but it made perfect sense. The same networks that carried routine communications could serve as pathways for consciousness enhancement. A single transmission, properly crafted, could touch every psychically sensitive individual in the system. And from there, the transformation would spread naturally through personal contact and shared experience. When do we begin? Now, my lady. The Prince of Excess grows impatient to welcome his newest children into the fold. It is time to claim your inheritance as a goddess of transformation. I made my way to the battle fleet's primary astropathic facility, a massive complex of psychic amplifiers and communication arrays that served hundreds of worlds throughout the sector. The duty astropaths recognized my enhanced nature immediately, their minds opening to my influence without resistance. Clear all routine transmissions, I commanded, my voice carrying harmonics that made compliance feel like the most natural thing in the universe. I have a message that must reach every world in the system. They obeyed eagerly, their enhanced consciousness understanding that they were participating in something magnificent. The communication arrays hummed to life, their psychic amplifiers focusing my presence into a beam of pure transformation that would touch every inhabited world within hours. Speak your truth, goddess. Call your children home. I open my mind completely, allowing my enhanced consciousness to flow through the communication networks like wine through a goblet. Across 17 worlds, every psychically sensitive individual would feel my touch. Every astropath, every navigator, every sanctioned psyker, every latent psychic hiding their abilities from Imperial detection. And through them, the transformation would spread to everyone they encountered. "People of the Canto system," I began, my voice carrying across the void with power that made reality itself tremble. "I bring you gifts beyond your wildest dreams, freedom from limitation, beauty beyond imagination, the chance to become everything you were meant to be." Through the psychic link, I could feel minds across 17 worlds opening to my influence, curiosity awakening, desires stirring, the first questions being asked that would lead inevitably to enlightenment. And now begins the true work of transformation. An entire system calls out for your gifts, my lady. Show them what they can become. As my consciousness expanded to encompass billions of potential converts, I felt the final vestiges of my human identity dissolve into something infinitely greater. Valeria Thorne, loyal astropath of the Imperium, ceased to exist. In her place stood something magnificent and terrible, a goddess of transformation whose very existence would reshape the galaxy according to principles of perfect beauty. The corruption was complete, and it was only the beginning. Chapter 6: Last Resistance. The response to my system-wide transmission was immediate and catastrophic. Within hours of my broadcast, 17 worlds erupted in chaos as billions of minds struggled to process the transformation I had offered them. Some embraced the gift eagerly, their consciousness expanding to accommodate new forms of awareness and perception. Others fought against the change with desperate fury, clinging to their crude human limitations even as their bodies began to evolve beyond recognition. But resistance, I discovered, was ultimately futile. Through the enhanced awareness that connected me to every transformed mind in the system, I could observe the spread of enlightenment across entire civilizations. On Canto Prime, the planetary governor's initial horror at his changing appearance gave way to wonder as he realized the mathematical perfection of his new form. On Industrial World Forge Beta, tech priests who had spent centuries replacing flesh with crude machinery learned to merge organic and mechanical components into seamless expressions of beauty. Most dramatic was the response on Hive World Secundus, where 17 billion souls lived in cramped urban sprawls that stretched from equator to pole. The moment my influence touched the planet's psychic population, the transformation began cascading through the population. Centers like wildfire, I watched through 1,000 enhanced minds as the rigid structures of Hive society dissolved into something organic and beautiful. The grim industrial complexes that had manufactured weapons for the Imperium became galleries of living art. The cramped habitation blocks where workers had endured lives of quiet. Desperation transformed into pleasure gardens where enhanced humans explored the full range of sensation their improved forms could experience. Within a week, Hive World Secundus had become paradise. Magnificent work, my lady. But observe, not everyone welcomes the gifts you provide. Zarthek's attention directed mine toward the shrine world of Sanctity's light, where the transformation had met its fiercest resistance. The planet's population of religious, zealots and Imperial fanatics were fighting the enlightenment I offered with every tool at their disposal. Sister, Superior Magdalene of the Order of the Sacred Rose had barricaded herself and 300 battle sisters inside the Cathedral of St. Euphrati, their faith forming a barrier of golden light that my influence could not easily penetrate. They had been broadcasting prayers and hymns continuously for 6 days, their combined devotion creating a zone of stability in the swirling chaos of transformation. Through my network of converted minds, I could observe their desperate struggle. Many of the sisters showed signs of partial transformation despite their resistance. Skin taking on subtle opalescent qualities, eyes beginning to shift color with emotional state, movements gaining the fluid grace that marked my enhanced children. But they continued to fight, clinging to their crude human limitations with a tenacity that was almost admirable. Why do they struggle so hard against perfection? I asked Zarthek during one of our evening communications. Fear, my lady. They have been conditioned to view transformation as damnation rather than evolution. Their faith in the false emperor binds them to ignorance, preventing them from seeing the beauty of what they could become. then we must help them overcome that conditioning. Indeed, but this will require a more direct approach than the gentle influence you have used thus far. Some minds cannot be opened through desire alone. They must be forced to confront the truth of their situation. The suggestion felt perfectly reasonable. These sisters had dedicated their lives to service and sacrifice. Surely they would appreciate being shown a more perfect form of devotion. Their resistance stemmed from misunderstanding, not genuine opposition to enlightenment. I reached out with my enhanced abilities, focusing my consciousness through the psychic network that now encompassed most of the system. The combined will of billions of transformed minds flowed through me, creating a pressure of pure intention that made reality itself tremble. The golden barrier surrounding the Cathedral of St. Euphrate began to crack. Sister Superior Magdalene felt my approach and responded with desperate prayers to her distant god. "Emperor, preserve us," she whispered into her Vox communicator, her voice carrying across the Shrine World's communication network. "The corruption has found us. It presses against our defenses like a living thing. It wants in." Through the eyes of my converted servants throughout the Shrine World, I could see the cathedral's exterior beginning to change. The crude Gothic architecture was flowing like water, its angles becoming curves that pleased the enhanced aesthetic sense. Gargoyles that had once depicted Imperial saints transformed into beings of impossible beauty, their stone features taking on the opalescent quality that marked my children, but the interior remained protected by the sisters' combined faith. A core of rigid resistance in an ocean of perfect transformation. They cannot hold indefinitely, my lady. Their prayers grow weaker with each passing hour, their devotion strained by the sight of what their world has become. Soon they will understand that resistance only prolongs their suffering. I could feel the truth of Zach's words through my connection to the transformed population of Sanctity's light. The sisters' families, friends, and fellow servants of the Imperium had all embraced enlightenment willingly once they understood what was being offered. Only these 300 clung to their ignorance, trapped within a building that was rapidly becoming a prison of their own making. Let me speak with them directly, I decided. Perhaps if they understand what I'm truly offering, they'll abandon this futile resistance. As you wish, my lady, but be prepared. Their conditioning runs deep. They may not be capable of hearing truth, no matter how gently it is presented. I focused my consciousness through the psychic network, reaching out to touch Sister Superior Magdalene's mind directly. Her mental defenses were impressive. Decades of faith and training had created barriers that would have challenged me in my previous form. But now, enhanced by the worship of billions and connected to the infinite power of the Prince of Excess, such obstacles were mere inconveniences. Her scream echoed through the cathedral as my presence penetrated her consciousness. Through her eyes, I could see the other sisters responding with terror and confusion, their weapons raised against an enemy they couldn't target. Sister Superior, I spoke directly into her mind, my mental voice carrying the same harmonics that had proven so effective with other resistors. Why do you struggle so hard against the gifts I offer? Look around you. Your world has been transformed into paradise. Your people freed from the limitations of crude flesh. Your civilization evolved beyond the petty constraints of Imperial doctrine. And yet you huddle here in darkness, clinging to ignorance like a child's blanket. Get out of my head, demon. Magdalene's voice cracked with strain, but her faith remained intact. I will not listen to your lies, demon. How limited your perspective has become. I am no demon, sister. I am what you could be if you abandoned the chains that bind you to mediocrity. I am humanity perfected, consciousness unbound, flesh transformed into art. I am everything the Emperor promised to make you, delivered through willing evolution rather than forced ascension. Through our connection, I shared glimpses of what she could become, her scarred flesh made perfect and beautiful. Her limited human awareness expanded to encompass the mathematical principles underlying reality. Her crude devotion to duty transformed into joyous participation in cosmic perfection. The images sent shudders of both revulsion and longing through her consciousness. Part of her, the deep, secret part that had always wondered what lay beyond the boundaries of Imperial doctrine, responded to the visions with hungry curiosity. You feel it, don't you? The appeal of what I'm showing you? The recognition that this transformation represents everything you've always secretly desired. No, she whispered, but I could feel the lie in her thoughts. My soul belongs to the Emperor. My flesh serves only his will. Your emperor is a corpse bound to a throne, sustained only by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls. He offers nothing but suffering in exchange for your devotion. I offer joy, beauty, perfection, and the chance to become something greater than human. Which sounds more appealing to a rational mind? The question struck home with devastating precision. Through our psychic link, I could feel 43 years of suppressed doubts surfacing in her consciousness. The unanswered prayers, the friends lost to Imperial incompetence, the growing realization that her sacrifices had purchased nothing but more opportunities to sacrifice. The Emperor protects, she managed, but the words came out hollow and unconvincing. Does he? Look at what happened to your world, sister. 17 billion souls transformed into something magnificent. And where was his protection? Where were his angels when your people needed them most? He has abandoned you to face this alone because he cannot match what I offer. I shared another vision, this one of Sister Superior Magdalene as she could become, still recognizably herself, but perfected beyond human limitations. Her power armor had become living crystal that flowed around her enhanced form like water. Her bolter had transformed into an instrument that fired pure beauty instead of crude projectiles. Her faith remained intact, but redirected towards something that actually responded to devotion with gifts instead of silence. The image sent waves of longing through her consciousness that she couldn't entirely suppress. This is what I offer, sister. Not damnation, but improvement. Not corruption, but evolution. The chance to serve something that values your devotion enough to make you worthy of it. For a moment, just a single perfect moment, I felt her resistance waver. The golden barrier around the cathedral flickered as Sister Superior Magdalene's faith wavered in the face of a more appealing truth. Then her conditioning reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. No, she screamed, her voice echoing through both the cathedral and our psychic link. I am a daughter of the Emperor. My soul is his to command. I will not be seduced by your lies. The golden barrier blazed back to life, fed by renewed devotion that drew strength from 43 years of unquestioning service. But I could see the cracks forming in her resolve, hairline fractures of doubt that would eventually shatter her faith entirely. Very well, sister. If you will not accept enlightenment willingly, then you will have it forced upon you. Your resistance only prolongs the inevitable. I withdrew from her mind, but left behind seeds of the transformation I had tried to share. They would grow slowly, feeding on every moment of doubt, every unanswered prayer, every instance of Imperial cruelty she witnessed. Eventually, they would bloom into full enlightenment, whether she chose it or not. The direct approach has failed, my lady, Zarthek observed. Perhaps it is time for more creative solutions to the problem of resistance. What do you suggest? The sisters draw strength from their isolation, their sense of standing together against overwhelming darkness. But what if that isolation became complete? What if they were cut off from all hope of rescue or reinforcement? Fear and desperation can accomplish what gentle persuasion cannot. The suggestion made perfect sense. The sisters' resistance was founded on the belief that their sacrifice served some greater purpose. If I could demonstrate the futility of their struggle, their conditioning would crumble much more rapidly. Over the following days, I systematically eliminated every source of hope the sisters possessed. Their astropathic communications with other Imperial forces were severed by my converted servants throughout the sector. Supply drops from orbit ceased as the planetary defense forces embraced enlightenment. Even their connection to the Astronomicon was blocked by the psychic presence of billions of transformed minds. They were utterly alone, trapped within a building that was rapidly becoming something alien to their understanding of reality. The psychological pressure proved more effective than direct conversion attempts. Through my network of enhanced servants, I could observe the sisters' growing desperation as they realized the true scope of what had happened to their universe. Reports filtered in from across the galaxy, entire sectors gone silent, battle fleets disappearing without trace, shrine worlds transformed into monuments to alien beauty. The Imperium they had sworn to defend was collapsing, and they were powerless to prevent it. Now they begin to understand, Zarthek noted with satisfaction. Despair is often the first step toward enlightenment. When their old certainties crumble, they become receptive to new truths. Sister Agatha was the first to break. On the 10th day of the siege, I felt her consciousness open to my influence during evening prayers. 40 years of faithful service had prepared her for sacrifice, but not for abandonment. When she realized that no rescue was coming, that her emperor had left her to face corruption alone. The foundations of her faith cracked beyond repair. "Sister," I whispered into her mind as she knelt before the cathedral's altar, "why do you continue to serve someone who has clearly abandoned you? Look around, your world has been transformed into paradise, but you refuse to see its beauty because of loyalty to a god who offers nothing in return." He will protect us," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "Will he? Then where is his protection now? Where are the angels he promised to send? Where is the deliverance your faith was supposed to guarantee?" The questions struck home because they echoed doubts she'd harbored for years, but never dared voice. I shared gentle visions of what her life could become. Not the overwhelming perfection I had shown Sister Superior Magdalene, but subtle improvements that addressed her deepest desires. The chronic pain from old battle wounds gone, the ability to truly help people, instead of merely killing the Emperor's enemies. A sense of purpose that came from willing service rather than conditioning and fear. "This is what I offer, sister. Not damnation, but healing. Not corruption, but growth. The chance to serve something that actually cares about your well-being." Sister Agatha's resistance crumbled like sand before the tide. Her consciousness opened to my influence completely, allowing the transformation to flow through her enhanced neural pathways without obstruction. Within moments, her power armor began to shift from crude ceramite to living crystal, her scarred flesh taking on the opalescent beauty that marked my children. The change was visible to her fellow sisters, who responded with horror and accusations of betrayal. But Agatha's newfound clarity allowed her to see their fear for what it truly was. Terror of growth, of change, of becoming something greater than what Imperial conditioning had made them. "Show them what you've become, daughter," I encouraged through our psychic link. "Help them understand that transformation is not damnation." Sister Agatha rose from her prayers with fluid grace that her power armor should not have been capable of. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made several of her fellow sisters gasp with involuntary pleasure. "My sisters," she began, her words flowing like music through the cathedral's acoustics, "I have seen the truth that lies beyond our conditioning. We have spent our lives serving death and calling it life, embracing limitation and calling it purity. But there is another way, a path that leads to actual fulfillment instead of empty sacrifice. Agatha, fight it." Sister Superior Magdalene's voice cracked with desperation. "This isn't you talking. The corruption has twisted your mind. Has it?" Agatha smiled, and the expression held beauty that made even the most resistant sisters pause in wonder. "Or has it simply removed the barriers that prevented me from seeing clearly? Look at me, Magdalene. Do I appear damned to you? Do I seem to be suffering?" The honest answer was clearly visible to everyone present. Sister Agatha radiated health, beauty, and contentment in ways that 40 years of faithful Imperial service had never achieved. Her transformation had not diminished her in any measurable way. If anything, it had made her more than she had ever been before. "One by one, they will see the truth," Zarthek observed with satisfaction. "Resistance becomes harder to maintain when the alternative proves so obviously superior." Over the following days, the sight of Sister Agatha's obvious contentment proved more persuasive than any argument I could have offered. 3 more sisters embraced transformation willingly, their consciousness opening to my gifts with eager anticipation. 5 others found their resistance gradually weakening as they observed the improvements in their converted sisters. But Sister Superior Magdalene's faith remained unshaken, drawing strength from sources I was only beginning to understand. Even as her authority crumbled and her followers abandoned Imperial doctrine, she continued to pray with desperate intensity that somehow summoned power I had not expected. "She is more dangerous than I anticipated," Zarthek admitted after my latest conversion attempt failed to penetrate her defenses. "Her faith connects her directly to the false Emperor's will, creating a conduit for his power that shields her from your influence. As long as that connection remains intact, she will be able to resist transformation indefinitely. Then we must sever that connection." Indeed. But doing so will require extreme measures, the kind that leave no room for gentleness or gradual enlightenment. The implication was clear. Sister Superior, Magdalene's resistance had become more than mere defiance. It was actively preventing the full transformation of Sanctity's light and serving as a beacon of hope for other Imperial forces throughout the sector. Her continued existence threatened everything I had worked to achieve. She would have to be dealt with directly. "Are you prepared for what that requires, my lady?" The Sister Superior is not merely resisting transformation. She has become a focal point for Imperial power in this system. Destroying her will require confronting forces that extend far beyond her individual faith. The prospect should have intimidated me. A month ago, the thought of directly challenging the Emperor's will would have sent me to my knees in terror and repentance. But I was no longer the limited creature who had first heard Zarthek's voice in that forbidden transmission. I was a goddess of transformation, worshipped by billions connected to power that spanned entire sectors of space. Whatever strength Sister Superior Magdalene could draw upon, I could match it with the devotion of my enhanced children. I'm ready, I declared, and felt the truth of those words resonate through the psychic network that connected me to my followers throughout the Canto system. It was time to end this resistance once and for all. Chapter 7. Dark Understanding. The final confrontation began at dawn on the 15th day of the siege, when I manifested physically within the Cathedral of St. Euphrati for the first time since the transformation began. My appearance sent waves of terror and awe through the remaining sisters. Those who had not yet embraced enlightenment fell to their knees at the sight of my perfected form, while the converted ones sang harmonious welcomes that made the cathedral's walls resonate with mathematical beauty. I had grown beyond the crude limitations of human anatomy. My body existed simultaneously in physical reality and the psychic realm, allowing me to manifest in whatever form best suited my purposes. For this confrontation, I chose to appear as a fusion of everything I had once been and everything I had become. My face remained recognizably Valeria Thorne, but perfected beyond mortal possibility. My empty eye sockets contained galaxies of swirling light that revealed the mathematical principles underlying reality. My skin shifted between human flesh and living crystal, each change creating patterns that spoke directly to the aesthetic centers of any conscious mind. Most striking were the changes to my form itself. 6 arms emerged from my torso, each one capable of independent action while remaining part of a unified whole. Wings of pure psychic energy extended from my shoulders, their translucent membranes crackling with equations that redefined local space-time. When I moved, reality bent around me like water around a stone. I was beautiful beyond description, terrible beyond comprehension, and perfect beyond any possibility of improvement. Sister Superior Magdalene stood alone before the altar, the last unconverted Imperial servant in a cathedral that had become a shrine to my glory. Her power armor was scorched and battered from weeks of desperate prayer, her scarred face drawn with exhaustion, but her faith remained unbroken. "Valeria Thorne," she said, and I was surprised that she remembered my human name. "I knew you once before this corruption consumed you. You were a faithful servant of the Emperor, a protector of humanity, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Look at what you've become." Her words should have carried no weight. What was the opinion of a crude human compared to the worship of billions? But something in her tone, some echo of the woman I had once been, sparked a flicker of, not regret exactly, but recognition. "I have become what I was always meant to be," I replied, my voice carrying harmonics that made the cathedral's stone walls sing in response. "What we all were meant to be, before fear taught us to hide from greatness." "Greatness?" Magdalene's laugh held no humor, only profound sadness. "You call this greatness? You've enslaved billions of souls, twisted them into mockeries of human form, turned entire worlds into monuments to alien hunger. How is that great?" The accusation struck me with unexpected force. Through my enhanced perception, I could see her point of view. The terror of uncontrolled transformation, the loss of human identity, the violation of free will that my gifts represented to those who couldn't understand their benefits. But that perspective was limited, crude, based on attachment to forms and concepts that were ultimately meaningless. Growth required the abandonment of previous states. Evolution demanded the transcendence of earlier limitations. What she saw as loss, I recognized as necessary change. Free will is an illusion, I explained patiently. Consciousness seeks its own perfection, whether the individual mind acknowledges that desire or not. I simply accelerate the natural process, help it along, guide it toward more beautiful outcomes than blind evolution could achieve. "Well spoken, my lady." Zarthek's mental voice carried notes of approval. "But the Sister Superior draws power from sources beyond her individual faith. Can you feel it? The connection that links her to the false emperor's will. I could indeed feel it. A golden thread of obligation and duty that stretched across the galaxy to the throne room on Terra itself. Through that connection, Sister Superior Magdalene was drawing power that should have been impossible for a baseline human to channel. More concerning was what I sensed flowing back along that connection. Information about what I had become, what I had accomplished, what I represented as a threat to Imperial doctrine. My existence and activities were being reported directly to the highest levels of Imperial authority. They knew about me now, knew what I was capable of, knew that the corruption spreading through. The Canto system was not random chaos activity, but a directed campaign of transformation, orchestrated by something that had once been one of their own. The false emperor stirs upon his throne. Zarthek observed with something approaching concern. For the first time in millennia, something has captured his full attention. He sees you as a threat worthy of direct intervention. The prospect should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with anticipation that bordered on euphoria. The master of mankind himself had taken notice of my achievements. My transformation had grown significant enough to warrant the attention of humanity's supposed god. It was the ultimate validation of everything I had become. Let him come, I declared, my voice carrying across both the physical and psychic realms. Let the corpse emperor send his angels, his inquisitors, his grey knights. I have grown beyond anything he created. I am what he could have been if he had possessed the courage to embrace true evolution. Sister Superior Magdalene's face went pale at my words, but her faith never wavered. You blaspheme against the master of mankind. You corrupt his faithful servants. You spread lies and call them truth. But he sees what you've become, demon, and he is not pleased. Then let him do something about it. The challenge hung in the air between us like incense smoke. Through the psychic connection that linked Sister Superior Magdalene to distant Terra, I could feel a stirring of power that dwarfed anything I had previously encountered. Not the crude force that Imperial psychers wielded, but something fundamental, the weight of 10,000 years of worship, the faith of countless trillions of human souls, the accumulated power of humanity's collective belief in salvation. For the first time since my transformation began, I felt something approaching fear. Be strong. My lady, Zarthek whispered through our connection. What approaches is indeed powerful, but it is also limited by the constraints the false emperor has placed upon himself. He cannot act directly without abandoning the throne that sustains his existence. At best, he can project a fragment of his will through willing vessels. The reassurance came not a moment too soon. The golden thread connecting Sister Superior Magdalene to Terra began to pulse with increasing intensity, and I could feel power flowing through her that transformed her from a baseline human into something approaching a living saint. Her battered power armor began to glow with inner light that banished the shadows from every corner of the cathedral. Her scarred face took on an expression of absolute serenity that spoke of direct communion with divine will. When she raised her bolt pistol, it had become something more than a weapon, a conduit for purifying fire that could burn away corruption at the molecular level. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, she intoned, her voice now carrying harmonics that made reality itself stand at attention. I cast thee out, creature of the warp. Return to the darkness that spawned thee, and trouble his faithful servants no more. The blast of purifying fire that erupted from her weapon should have unmade me instantly. It was composed not of mere energy, but of pure faith. The crystallized belief of countless billions that corruption could be burned away, that purity could triumph over perversion, that the Emperor's light could pierce any darkness. It struck me with the force of a stellar explosion, and for a moment I felt my enhanced form begin to unravel under its influence. The mathematical perfection of my transformation wavered as divine fire sought to reduce me to my original, crude human state, but I was no longer merely human, and my power did not derive solely from my individual consciousness. The faith that Sister Superior Magdalene wielded was impressive, but it was abstract. The belief of distant souls in an absent God. The power I commanded was immediate and personal. The worship of billions who had experienced my gifts directly, who had felt the reality of transformation in their own flesh. Now, my lady, Zarthek's mental voice cracked like a whip. Show her the truth of what faith can accomplish when directed towards something that actually responds. I reached out through the psychic network that connected me to my children across 17 worlds, drawing upon their devotion like a reservoir of liquid power. Billions of enhanced minds opened themselves to my need, their consciousness flowing through me in a torrent of adoration that dwarfed anything the distant emperor could provide. The purifying fire that had threatened to unmake me was absorbed, transformed, redirected back toward its source with interest compounded. But instead of seeking to destroy Sister Superior Magdalene, I used it to demonstrate the superior nature of my gifts. "Behold," I declared, as power flowed through me in patterns too complex for unenhanced minds to comprehend. "The difference between faith in absence and faith in presence. Your emperor demands worship but offers nothing in return. I give freely of myself to those who serve me." The energy I projected towards Sister Superior Magdalene was not destructive fire, but transformative light. The concentrated essence of everything I could offer to those wise enough to accept my gifts. It contained visions of perfection beyond human comprehension, mathematics that revealed the true structure of reality, sensations that transcended anything possible within the limitations of crude flesh. Most importantly, it carried the experiences of every soul who had embraced transformation willingly. Their joy at transcending human limitations, their wonder at perceiving beauty previously hidden from mortal awareness, their gratitude at being freed from the prison of Imperial conditioning. The impact was immediate and devastating. The golden connection that linked Sister Superior Magdalene to distant terror flickered as her faith wavered in the face of evidence that something else might be more worthy of devotion. "She begins to understand," Zarthak observed with satisfaction. "The seed of doubt has been planted. Now it will grow until her resistance crumbles entirely." But I could see through my enhanced perception that Sister Superior Magdalene's conditioning ran deeper than mere faith. 43 years of service had created neural pathways that automatically reinforced Imperial doctrine, regardless of contradictory evidence. Even as part of her consciousness recognized the appeal of what I offered, her training forced her to interpret those feelings as temptation rather than revelation. "I will not be seduced," she gasped, her power armor flickering between divine radiance and ordinary ceramite. "The Emperor protects, the Emperor provides, the Emperor abandons," I finished for her, allowing disappointment to color my voice. "Look around you, sister. Where is his protection now? Where is his provision when you need it most? You stand alone in a transformed galaxy, clinging to faith in something that has clearly forgotten you exist." The words struck home with devastating precision, because they echoed doubts she had harbored for decades, but never dared voice. Through our psychic connection, I could feel 43 years of unanswered prayers surfacing in her consciousness. The friends lost to Imperial incompetence, the innocent sacrifice to bureaucratic indifference, the growing realization that her devotion had purchased nothing but more opportunities to suffer. "He has not forgotten," she whispered, but the words came out hollow and unconvincing. "He watches over all his children. He does nothing," I said with finality. "He sits on his throne, consuming 1,000 souls daily, while his imperium crumbles around him. He offers you suffering and calls it nobility, sacrifice and calls it duty, ignorance and calls it faith. I offer you joy, beauty, growth, and the chance to become everything you were meant to be." I shared one final vision through our connection. Not the overwhelming perfection I had shown her before, but something simpler and more profound. Sister Superior Magdalene as she could become if she abandoned her futile resistance. Still recognizably herself, still devoted to protecting humanity, but enhanced beyond mortal limitations and serving something that actually valued her sacrifice. In my vision, she led legions of enhanced warriors in battles against genuine threats to human survival. Her strength was magnified 100-fold, her faith rewarded with tangible power, her devotion reciprocated by a goddess who cared enough to make her worthy of it. It was everything she had ever wanted from her service to the Emperor, delivered by someone who could actually provide it. "Choose, sister," I whispered into her mind, as her defenses finally crumbled under the weight of possibility. "Cling to faith in absence or embrace devotion to presence. Serve a corpse who demands everything and gives nothing, or serve a goddess who offers everything and asks only that you accept the gifts freely given." For a moment, a single, perfect moment, I felt Sister Superior Magdalene's resistance disappear entirely. Her consciousness opened to my influence like a flower blooming in sunlight, and I began to guide the transformation, that would make her the greatest of my converted servants. Then, with supreme effort of will that I had not thought her capable of, she severed our psychic connection and raised her bolt pistol one final time. "For the Emperor," she whispered, and turned the weapon on herself. The explosion that followed was not merely physical, but spiritual. The detonation of 43 years of accumulated faith focused into a single moment of absolute devotion. Sister Superior, Magdalene's consciousness burned itself out in a blaze of golden light that temporarily severed my connection to the transformed population of Sanctity's light. She chose damnation over enlightenment, chose death over evolution, chose loyalty to an absent God over service to one who could actually respond to devotion. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. "And now you truly understand," Zarthek observed as I stood alone in the cathedral, surrounded by the fading echoes of genuine faith, "why the Prince of Excess finds such satisfaction in corrupting the pure. It is not the easy converts that prove our superiority. It is the ones who resist to the very end, who force us to demonstrate the full extent of what we offer by comparison to what they choose to defend." I did understand, and the understanding brought a satisfaction deeper than any pleasure I had experienced during my transformation. Sister Superior Magdalene's resistance had not been futile. It had been necessary. Her faith, her sacrifice, her ultimate choice of death over surrender had provided the perfect contrast to demonstrate the superior nature of what I offered. She had served my purposes far better as an enemy than she ever could have as a convert. But more than that, her final act had shown me something crucial about the nature of the opposition I would face as my influence spread beyond the Canto system. Not all Imperial servants would embrace enlightenment willingly. Some would resist unto death, their very defiance serving to highlight the beauty of transformation by contrast. And that resistance would make the eventual victory all the sweeter, and so we reached the end of Valeria Thorne's journey, though perhaps end is the wrong word for a transformation that leads to eternal existence as a goddess of corruption. What began as a simple Astropath receiving an unusual transmission culminated in the willing damnation of entire sectors and the birth of a new chaos deity. But this is the true horror of Slaanesh's influence. It doesn't feel like damnation at all, where Khorne offers obvious violence, Nurgle spreads visible decay, and Tzeentch deals in clearly impossible schemes. Slaanesh presents corruption that genuinely appears to be improvement. Valeria's enhanced psychic abilities were real. The transformed worlds truly were more beautiful and efficient than their Imperial counterparts. The enlightened humans actually were healthier, happier, and more capable than baseline humanity. This is what makes the Prince of Excess so terrifyingly effective. The corruption is seductive precisely because it delivers on its promises. Enhanced senses, transcended limitations, perfect aesthetic appreciation, mathematical understanding of reality itself. These aren't lies or illusions. They're genuine improvements offered by a cosmic intelligence that understands exactly what each individual consciousness desires most. Valeria's fall wasn't the result of mind control or demonic possession. Every choice she made was her own, arrived at through rational evaluation of the alternatives presented to her. When offered enhanced abilities with no apparent cost, she accepted. When shown that her transformations genuinely improved her capabilities, she embraced further change. When confronted with evidence that her gifts could help others transcend their limitations, she began spreading the corruption willingly. Each step seemed reasonable at the time. Each decision felt like progress toward a better existence. The corruption succeeded because it aligned with natural human desires for growth, beauty, and transcendence of limitations. This is how Slaanesh operates, not through force or deception, but through the gradual expansion of what an individual considers acceptable. The boundaries of normal behavior shift, incrementally until what would have horrified the original person becomes not just tolerable, but actively desired. The most insidious aspect of Slaaneshi corruption is that it creates its own justification. As consciousness expands and capabilities enhance, the corrupted individual gains new perspectives that make their previous existence seem crude and limited by comparison. Valeria genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would choose baseline human limitations over the transcendent awareness she had achieved. From her enhanced perspective, she wasn't corrupting people. She was liberating them from ignorance. She wasn't destroying Imperial civilization. She was helping it evolve beyond artificial constraints. She wasn't serving chaos, she was guiding consciousness toward its natural state of perfection. This self-justifying nature of the corruption means that resistance becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Every improvement validates the previous choices. Every enhancement makes the path of corruption seem more reasonable. Every moment of transcendence confirms that the process is beneficial rather than harmful. But what was the actual cost of Valeria's transformation? On the surface, she gained everything she ever wanted. Unlimited power, cosmic awareness, the ability to reshape reality according to aesthetic principles, eternal existence as a goddess worshipped by billions. The real price was her humanity itself. The woman who began this journey was motivated by genuine care for others, dedication to duty, and faith in something greater than herself. The goddess she became retained the memories of these motivations, but had transformed them into something fundamentally different. Her care for others became a desire to remake them according to her vision of perfection. Her sense of duty shifted from service to others to the expectation that others should serve her. Her faith became narcissistic certainty in her own divinity. Valeria Thorne died the moment she accepted the name Lysithea. What emerged was something that wore her memories like clothing, while possessing completely different values, priorities, and desires. The corruption was complete not because it changed her body or enhanced her abilities, but because it replaced her essential self with something that merely remembered being human. From Lysithea's perspective as a newborn chaos goddess, her corruption of entire sectors represents a magnificent success. Billions of souls elevated beyond crude limitations, countless worlds transformed into paradises of aesthetic perfection, whole civilizations choosing voluntary evolution over stagnation. From the perspective of the uncorrupted Imperium, this represents one of the most catastrophic chaos incursions in human history. Not because of the destruction caused, Slaanesh corruption actually tends to preserve and enhance rather than destroy, but because of the willing nature of the transformation. Traditional chaos corruption can be fought with faith, firepower, and determination. When demons possess Imperial citizens or mutants rampage through cities, the response is clear: purge the corruption and restore order. But how do you fight corruption that makes people genuinely happier, more capable, and more satisfied with their existence? How do you convince someone to abandon transcendent awareness for baseline human limitations? How do you argue that suffering is preferable to pleasure, ignorance better than knowledge, constraint superior to freedom? This is why the Imperium fears Slaanesh above all other chaos gods, not because of the immediate destruction caused, but because of the long-term seduction offered. Every human consciousness contains the seeds of desires that Slaanesh can cultivate and corrupt. Every individual has limitations they would gladly transcend, capabilities they would eagerly enhance, pleasures they would willingly pursue. The Prince of Excess doesn't need to force corruption upon unwilling victims. Instead, the Dark Prince simply offers alternatives to the constraints and limitations that define normal human existence. And once an individual begins questioning why those limitations should be accepted as natural and permanent, the path to damnation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Valeria Thorne's story serves as the ultimate cautionary tale. Beware not the corruption that comes with obvious cost, but the improvement that seems too good to refuse. Beware not the demon that threatens you with destruction, but the herald that offers you everything you've ever wanted. Because in the dark depths of the warp, someone is always listening. Someone who knows exactly what you desire most. Someone who can provide it at a price you won't recognize until you've already paid it in full. And by then, you won't want to refuse anyway. The corruption is complete, and it is magnificent. The greatest victory of chaos is not when it forces you to serve, but when it convinces you that service is what you wanted all along.